Imagine a news segment, right? A solution gets proposed for a huge societal crisis, and it's just so shocking, so, I mean, utterly dehumanizing. It immediately just lights up this firestorm.
Yep.
We're talking about a statement that didn't just make waves, it was like a sonic boom across social media. Condemnation from, political figures, activists, millions of people watching.
Mm-hmm.
Today on the Daily Scope podcast, we are going to really dig into an incident that has sparked this huge debate about media ethics, compassion, and these really complex issues of homelessness and mental illness.
Exactly. And these weren't just, casual off-the-cuff remarks that someone might forget. They really touched some of the most sensitive nerves in our public conversation. It's forcing us to look not just at the actual words, the shocking content, but also the wider systemic failures that something like this really exposes.
Right.
The media backlash came fast, and it definitely poured fuel on an already, pretty heated public safety debate.
Welcome to the Daily Scope, your guide to understanding the most pressing, often complex stories of our time. I'm your host speaker.
And I'm your expert speaker.
And today we're doing a thorough, impartial look into this recent controversy. It's centered around Fox News host Brian Kilmeade, specifically comments he made about homeless individuals. We'll break down the statements themselves, the really intense backlash that followed, Kilmeade's apology later on, and also the tragic real-world events that kind of set the stage for all this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking mainly about the murder of Irina Zarutska. And we'll also zoom out a bit, look at the wider political landscape around, criminal justice, mental health, all based on the material you shared with us.
Yeah, our goal here at the Daily Scope is always to cut through the noise, to carefully look at all the different layers of a story like this and give you, our listener, a clearer, maybe more nuanced understanding of what exactly was said, why those words mattered so much, and the bigger societal issues tangled up in it all. We're really just trying to unpack what's in the sources.
Okay, so let's start by setting the scene. And that means, unfortunately, talking about a really tragic event that acted as the catalyst for these comments. On August 22nd in Charlotte, North Carolina, the city was just shaken by the murder of a young woman, Irina Zarutska.
Yeah.
And this event, it became much more than just a local tragedy pretty quickly, didn't it? It turned into a national flashpoint, reigniting these intense debates all over.
It really did. And Irina Zarutska's story is, well, it's just heartbreaking. She was only 23, a Ukrainian refugee, just recently immigrated to the U.S., trying to build a new life, Our sources say she was taking English classes, really working hard to integrate. And her family's lawyer later shared this detail, just awful, that she'd recently moved in with her partner. She'd actually texted him saying she was on her way home.
Oh, wow.
Just moments before she was stabbed on a light rail train, the Lynx Blue Line there in Charlotte. It's just a devastating story of someone who'd overcome so much, just starting out and her life cut short like that. Really shows the fragility sometimes of those new beginnings.
It really does. And the man arrested for this horrific crime, DeCarlos Brown Jr., he was identified as homeless and, crucially, diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Right.
And that detail, of course, immediately pushed the case way beyond Charlotte. It landed right in the national spotlight. And it forced these, uncomfortable, long-running discussions about things like public safety, the challenges we always seem to face with criminal justice reform, and the, often ignored but really urgent need for better mental health policy.
And what's really interesting here, looking at the sources, is how fast a single awful event like Irina Zarutska's murder can just expose these deep societal vulnerabilities. And in doing that, it forces a national conversation, whether we're ready for it or not. This tragedy, sadly, became this really stark example. It underlined the complexities in things like public transit security, how effective our mental health policies actually are or aren't, and the desperate need for reform. It connects all these issues in a way that, just looking at stats doesn't always do.
Which brings us right to that Fox and Friends segment. It aired on Wednesday, September 10th. And this is where those comments actually happened. The discussion on the show, it started off focusing on DeCarlos Brown Jr.'s criminal history, which was pretty extensive and troubling.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of predictably, it broadened out into this larger conversation about the whole homelessness crisis that we see in communities everywhere.
Yeah, and during that segment, one of the co-hosts, Lawrence Jones, he put forward a pretty specific, maybe even provocative argument. He basically said that many homeless people, especially those dealing with serious mental health issues, often refuse help, like public assistance or shelter or treatment programs.
Right, they decline the services.
Exactly. And his proposed solution was, well, pretty tough. He suggested eliminating choice in the matter. He actually said, quote, "You can't give them a choice." His argument was basically either you're forced to take the resources the state offers or the alternative is jail. He said either you take the resources that we're going to give you or you decide that you are going to be locked up in jail. That's the way it has to be now.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of approach, our sources show, it taps into a real frustration some people feel about, voluntary treatment models maybe not working.
Okay, let's really unpack this moment because the context is so important here. They're talking about a horrific, very fresh crime. And the conversation shifts to this really thorny question. What do you do with people who refuse help? Jones lays out this stark choice, help or jail.
Right.
But then the discussion takes this incredibly extreme and for a lot of people, just genuinely shocking turn. Brian Kilmeade jumps in, and his exact words, according to everything we've seen, were, or involuntary lethal injection or something, just kill him.
Wow.
I mean, that's a massive leap in rhetoric, isn't it? Going from forced jail time to explicitly mentioning execution. It just shows how volatile live TV commentary can get on these charged topics.
It really does. And what's insightful, I think, is just the sheer speed. How quickly that discussion goes from talking about systemic problems like repeat offenders or the homelessness crisis to suggesting such an extreme, violent, quote-unquote solution. That speed, maybe it reflects a wider frustration in society, like you said, or this desire for immediate, even if they're drastic, answers to really hard problems.
Yeah, maybe.
But it was the words themselves, Kilmeade's exact phrase, lethal injection, that drew such instant and huge condemnation. Not necessarily the underlying frustration, but the words.
Absolutely.
And the segment also shows these different approaches right there on air. You had Jones saying, jail them, which is sort of a coercive model, and then Kilmeade's much more extreme and, frankly, dehumanizing idea.
And the reaction, or maybe the lack of immediate reaction from the other co-host, Ainsley Earhart, is also worth noting.
Yes.
Instead of directly pushing back on Kilmeade's really disturbing statement, her first response was to ask, why did it have to get to this point? And then the conversation just seemed to pivot really quickly, almost jarringly, away from what Kilmeade actually said. It moved straight into electoral politics, criticizing district attorneys, calling for tougher law enforcement, kind of subtly tying it all to upcoming elections and justice policies. That quick shift is, well, it's fascinating in itself.
That's a really critical observation.
Right.
That pivot, from a deeply disturbing suggestion straight to political strategy, almost skipping over the gravity of the words themselves. It says a lot about the fast pace, the often polarized nature of, cable news talk.
Yeah.
The sheer audacity of Kilmeade's comment, and then the conversation just rolling on without really tackling the core of what he suggested right then and there.
Yeah.
That's what hit a nerve for so many people watching, for the critics. It really underlines how easily rhetoric can escalate in those settings.
Exactly. It shows how a live news segment can go from talking about the specifics of a tragedy to making broad political points about public safety, about perceived failures in the justice system. But that phrase, involuntary lethal injection, that absolutely became the center of the storm, didn't it? It overshadowed everything else and drew the most fire. Once you say something like that, you can't really take it back.
No, you can't. And these kinds of really powerful, often inflammatory comments, especially you see them on conservative news sometimes, they have this unique power to shape how people see things, how the discourse goes, especially once they go viral, which this absolutely did.
It makes you wonder about the thinking behind it, the implications. How do comments like that, said on a public stage, affect how we view vulnerable groups? Are they just tapping into existing frustrations, or are they actually pushing the line of what's okay to say in public? What do you think? Let us know in the comments.
Well, unsurprisingly, those comments didn't stay just on the broadcast.
No way.
This is where the story really picks up speed. The internet it did what the internet does with stuff like this. It exploded.
Right.
The clip, and it was labeled very pointedly, Brian Kilmeade endorses euthanizing homeless people. It spread like wildfire on social media.
Yeah, I saw that label.
By September 14th, just a few days after it aired, sources say it had over 20 million views just on X, formerly Twitter.
20 million, wow.
Yeah. So this wasn't just a little bit of grumbling. It was a huge wave of outrage. Condemnation came from everywhere, from, CEOs of shelters right up to state governors. A really wide spectrum.
If we connect that to the bigger picture, the way these comments went viral, it just highlights the incredible power of social media, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
It amplifies controversial statements, and it mobilizes public opinion almost instantly. And it really makes you think about the responsibility public figures have, especially when they're talking about sensitive, often stigmatized topics like mental health or homelessness.
Definitely. The condemnation, like you said, was immediate and it was widespread. Activists, homelessness advocates all over the country called the remarks dehumanizing, dangerous. Online, you saw commenters everywhere calling for action against Kilmeade, against Fox News itself. It really shows that many people have this kind of zero-tolerance stance for rhetoric that could even seem to incite harm or prejudice against vulnerable groups.
And the criticism wasn't just, random people online or general groups. Christine Quinn, who's the CEO of WIN, that's a major provider of shelter and housing for homeless families in New York City, she described Kilmeade's comments as, quote, completely devoid of all humanity.
Strong words.
Very strong. And she didn't just condemn him. She actually invited Kilmeade publicly to come volunteer at one of their shelters. The intention seemed pretty clear. Give him a real, first-hand, human look at homelessness, a total contrast to the abstract, dehumanizing thing he said.
That direct invitation from Christine Quinn, that's really telling, isn't it?
Yeah.
It shows this deep desire for actual engagement, a call for empathy, especially against the backdrop of these kinds of statements. It's like trying to bridge that gap with real human experience.
Yeah.
And then California Governor Gavin Newsom also weighed in pretty heavily. He didn't just condemn the remarks, he actually quoted scripture, Proverbs 21.13. He posted on X, "Whoever closes his ear to the cry of the poor will himself call out and not be answered." That brought this really strong moral, ethical dimension to the condemnation, broadening it out beyond just political disagreement.
Yeah.
These examples really show the scale of that social media outrage, how a comment can explode and lead to this wide political blowback.
So with this massive wave of criticism, this condemnation coming from all sides, an apology from Kilmeade felt, well, pretty much inevitable, right?
Seems likely, yeah.
And it came. On Sunday morning, September 14th, Kilmeade used the Fox and Friends Weekends platform to issue that public apology. He admitted his words were wrong. He was careful to stress they didn't reflect what he actually believed. And he specifically called the remark extremely callous.
And his explanation for saying it centered on his emotional state at the time. He basically said he was just so angry about the Charlotte killing, and that anger had clouded his judgment. Then he tried to clarify, walk back the sort of blanket statement implied by what he'd said earlier. He stated, "I recognize that not all mentally ill homeless people act as the perpetrator did." And he stressed, pretty emphatically, that mentally ill homeless people deserve our empathy and compassion. He expressed deep regret for speaking in a way that suggested this generalized violent fix for such a complex issue.
Yeah.
Our sources suggest this apology was pretty carefully put together, likely worked out with network executives, really aiming to control the damage from the significant fallout.
It is interesting how he framed it, isn't it? Blaming anger clouding judgment. It takes some personal responsibility, but it also gives this sort of psychological reason for the outburst.
Right.
It lets him frame it as a human error, maybe, rather than a deliberate ideological statement. And it's notable that Fox News itself, the network, they didn't put out a separate official statement.
No, they didn't.
They basically let Kilmeade's on-air apology stand as the network's response. They even put it up on their website, highlighting that Kilmeade admits fault. That was probably meant to diffuse things, reinforce the idea that, okay, it's been addressed. Kilmeade also reposted the full apology himself on his social media, so it was out there.
Which brings us to this really crucial question about media accountability, right? What's the actual role, the effectiveness of an apology in this kind of high-stakes media world? Kilmeade's apology, sure, it addressed the immediate public backlash. It probably shielded the network from more institutional criticism. But the careful wording, the fact the network didn't issue its own statement, it really suggests a calculated response. More about damage control, mitigating the fallout, than maybe a deeper institutional reflection or the look at their editorial standards.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you see this incident alongside other things happening around the same time, like an MSNBC contributor being fired over comments about the Charlie Kirk assassination. It just highlights the really strict, often immediate consequences for media figures if they're seen to cross a line, no matter their politics. It speaks to this wider, really volatile media landscape where words have huge, sometimes career-ending weight.
It definitely makes you think about apologies in the age of instant everything. Is an on-air apology, even if it sounds sincere, is it enough to reset things after a comment like that? Or does blaming anger just become a convenient excuse, not really a full reckoning with the power these platforms have? What do you think? Is a public apology enough in these situations, or should there be more? Does knowing he said he was angry change how you view the initial comment? Tell us what you think below.
Now, let's shift gears a bit, move beyond just the comment and the apology, because this whole thing is tied into a much bigger ongoing national conversation.
Right.
We're talking about where crime, mental health, and the justice system collide, especially with repeat offenders. This case and the comments about it really became a flashpoint for politicians to jump in on policy.
Hmm.
And the story of Etarcos Brown Jr., the man accused, is absolutely central to understanding all this complexity.
His history, as laid out in your sources, shows this long and frankly troubling criminal record. It really highlights some of the systemic problems in our justice and mental health systems.
Yeah, the sources say he had 14 prior arrests. 14.
Wow.
And significant past convictions. Felony larceny, robbery with a dangerous weapon, communicating threats, serious stuff. That led to a 6-year prison sentence he served from 2015 to 2020. It clearly shows this long pattern of repeat offending, which is a huge challenge everywhere.
And his interactions with the justice system didn't stop when he got out. Sources show that just months after his release in 2020, he was charged again, this time for assaulting his sister. And then more recently, January of this year, 2025, he was arrested for allegedly misusing the 9/11 system. Now, that charge can cover different things, maybe false reporting, harassment, often doesn't have severe initial consequences.
Right.
And crucially, in that case, he was released just by signing a written promise to show up in court later. That decision was made by Magistrate Judge Teresa Stokes. Releasing someone on a written promise is common for some nonviolent charges, tries to keep jails less crowded, make sure people come back to court without needing bail money. But that decision became a huge point of contention here.
And what's really sobering is how this long, troubling history ended with a horrific murder in Charlotte. Right now, Brown's being held without bond in Mecklenburg County Jail. Because of his documented schizophrenia diagnosis, a judge has ordered a competency evaluation, which is standard practice. They need to determine if he understands the charges, if he can help in his own defense. It's about due process, especially with mental illness involved.
Makes sense.
His next court date is set for September 19th. And the federal charge he's facing now for Irina Zarutska's murder, it carries a maximum penalty of life in prison, or possibly even execution. That just shows the extreme seriousness of the alleged crime and the legal process unfolding.
Yeah.
This whole tragic situation, with a clear pattern of repeat offenses, the underlying mental health diagnosis, it really exposes these, well, failures in the criminal justice system, doesn't it? And it highlights this persistent, really complex problem of how we manage repeat offenders, especially those struggling with severe mental illness within the system we have now.
And that history, especially that last release on a written promise, it immediately set off major political reactions, very loud ones, particularly about judicial decisions. We saw, for instance, 10 Republican lawmakers write a letter directly to the chief judge in that North Carolina district, Roy Wiggins. In it, they specifically questioned Judge Teresa Stokes' decision to release Brown back in January on that promise to appear. They argued her decision gave, quote, grounds for removal and had, as they put it, devastating consequences. They went so far as to say Zarutska's murder was, quote, a direct result of failure of judicial responsibility, basically putting the blame squarely on that one judicial decision.
And that immediate strong political reaction, it brings up that important question again. How do we as a society deal with the systemic issues that sometimes lead to these awful outcomes? Especially when you can point to specific moments, potential failures, or missed chances within the system.
Right.
These reactions from the GOP lawmakers, they really highlight the deep disagreements, the different philosophies about criminal justice reform versus, say, mental health services. And politicians often use these narratives strategically, campaigning on being tough on crime, using individual tragedies to push for policy changes, or criticize what they see as leniency.
Absolutely. And former President Donald Trump also got involved on Truth Social. He channeled his comments into a broader political attack. He blamed cashless bail policies, blamed Democrats who refused to put bad people in jail, and he specifically called out North Carolina's former disgraced governor and wannabe Senator Roy Cooper. Trump's message, the sources confirm, was a clear call to action. Vote Republican for law and order, directly tying the Charlotte tragedy to his political agenda to upcoming elections. It's a classic example of how a local tragedy gets nationalized for partisan politics.
It became a huge political talking point very quickly. And these concerns went right down to the local level, too. Charlotte City Council member Edwin Peacock III, a Republican, He publicly asked questions about safety on the city's light rail, like who's riding without paying? Are they the ones causing problems? His comments show that local worry about transit security, how one crime can spark broader questions about city safety, about enforcement.
Yeah.
And former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi also commented, predicting very definitively that Brown would never again see the light of day as a free man. All these statements together, from local officials to national figures, they just underline how one devastating event gets used to critique public safety policy, fuel that ongoing criminal justice debate, and rally political support around certain viewpoints.
This confluence of reactions really shows how fast a tragedy can become a platform for wider political talk. Elected officials, public figures, they often use these moments to push their own agendas, whether that's stricter law enforcement or, on the other side, reforms in the courts or mental health systems. To Carlos Brown Jr.'s long criminal history, the specific criticism of Judge Stokes' decision by the GOP, it all just got swept up into this bigger, very charged national story. It becomes less about the specific crime, maybe, and more about the perceived system failures.
And it's really important to remember, this whole thing, Kilmeade's comments, the outrage, the apology, the politics, it wasn't happening in isolation, was it?
No, not at all.
It was unfolding against this backdrop of other really intense events that were already dominating the news cycle.
Right, like the Fox and Friends segment itself, the one discussing Zaritska's murder. It actually aired just hours before the assassination of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk at Utah Valley University.
Exactly.
It just felt like the whole political and media landscape was just overflowing with these intense, emotionally loaded stories. It created this atmosphere of real tension, real scrutiny.
And what's so insightful there is how interconnected these events feel. It shows how one tragedy can quickly become a stage for these broader political and media narratives to play out. And it also reveals the immediate, often severe consequences for anyone seen to cross a line in their public commentary, no matter which side of the political aisle they're on.
Yeah.
We saw that parallel controversy you mentioned, the MSNBC contributor fired for comments about Kirk's murder, which then sparked huge conservative outrage.
Right.
Taken together, these incidents just underscore the intense scrutiny, the very real, often career-changing consequences media figures face in today's super polarized environment. Especially when we're talking about sensitive topics, about violence, it really raises that difficult question about the line, the often blurry line between commentary and incitement, and the huge responsibility that comes with having a public platform.
That's a crucial point. The media landscape is so polarized right now that almost every word, especially about political violence or vulnerable groups, gets amplified and put under this microscope. And that scrutiny often leads to immediate, real consequences for the people involved. It highlights this incredibly tricky tightrope that public figures have to walk.
Absolutely. The speed things go viral, the immediate demands for accountability we see, it just underlines the immense power and critically the profound responsibility that media figures have in shaping public opinion and the whole conversation. It makes it incredibly challenging to have genuinely nuanced, constructive discussions about really complex societal problems.
So when you look at all these things coming together, individual rights, the need for public safety, the huge impact of mental illness, it forces us to ask some really tough questions, doesn't it?
It does.
How do we, as a society, balance the rights of people struggling with mental illness or homelessness with that equally vital need for public safety in our communities? And what's the actual role elected officials play in shaping this delicate, often heated debate? What impact do their public statements really have, both on policy and how the public sees these issues? These aren't easy questions, and they get right to the heart of the criminal justice debate and where mental health policy meets public safety concerns.
We've really covered a lot of ground today on the Daily Scope, haven't we?
Yeah.
From Brian Kilmeade's shocking comments and the immediate fallout to the heartbreaking murder of Irina Zarutska and then all the political and social reactions that came after.
Yeah.
This isn't just a story about one person's words. It's really a window into these deep systemic challenges. Homelessness, mental health care, public safety, and the intense scrutiny on our media today. It touches on so many connected societal issues that really need our attention.
Indeed. And what really stands out, I think, from digging into these sources is how easily frustration, maybe collective frustration, can turn into this really dehumanizing language. It just reinforces how critical it is for us as a society to tackle these huge challenges with both empathy, always empathy, and a real commitment to understanding the root causes, not just jumping to simplistic or even worse, violent solutions, finding real homelessness solutions, making meaningful mental health reform happen. That's not just about policy, is it? It's fundamental to creating a more just, more humane society.
This whole situation with all its tangled layers, it forces us to face some uncomfortable truths about how we talk about and how we treat the most vulnerable people among us. So for you, our listener, we want to leave you with this question. What systemic changes do you think are genuinely needed? How do we address these complex issues, homelessness, mental health care, public safety in our communities, without falling back on dehumanizing language or making the divides in society even deeper? How can we actually foster more constructive, more empathetic conversations moving forward?
We really appreciate you joining us for this discussion. What are your thoughts on this complex, very charged story? Please share them in the comment section below. We genuinely read everyone.
We do.
If you found this conversation valuable, please give this video a like, subscribe to the Daily Scope for more discussions like this that aim to cut through the noise, and make sure you turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Scope.